If you seize power in a country after a 7-week campaign after a bloody civil war, can you expect that your dynasty will rule over this land for more than 250 years? In the case of Japan, that's exactly what happened after the Battle of Sekigahara. Hello, this is Michel Leviathan-Sorbet and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. Today I'd like to present you a game that I have in my collection from 2011, because that was the moment when the first edition of this game was released. This is a title which will cover one of the most important battles in Japan's history, the Battle of Sekigahara, and the game is called Sekigahara, the Unification of Japan. The game was released in 2011 by GMT Games. First, it was introduced to the P500 list and it spent several years on that list. It wasn't a game which attracted a lot of interest when it was first presented, and a few years passed from putting it onto the list to the final release. But when the game was released, it attracted a very high attention, and many people fell in love with this game. That is the reason why now we have several reprints of this game, and it is a war game which occupies, at the moment this film is being done, the 5th place on Board Game Geek in the war games category. So from an outsider, it became one of the most popular, one of the most highly rated war games ever published. The game covers, as I said a few moments ago, the epic struggle between two opposing forces at the beginning of the 17th century in Japan. It's the struggle between the forces led by Ishida Mitsunari and the forces led by Tokugawa Ieyasu. The battle, which occurred in 1600, was a decisive battle in terms that it shaped the form of Japan for the next 250 years. It's Tokugawa who emerged victorious from this struggle, and he started his own dynasty. He created the shogunate in Japan, and as I said a few moments ago, it shaped the form of Japan for the next centuries. It's a very interesting subject, and it's a game which is a game for 2 players. The time of play will be somewhere around 2.5 to 3 hours, and it is for players aged 14 and higher. It was designed by Matta Calkinsa, a very interesting person, a businessman, a multimillionaire, an entrepreneur. Very interesting. I recommend you read about him because this is also a very interesting story. Today I'd like to show you his design, so Sekigahara. I'd like to tell you a few words about how this game works, and at the end I'd like to share with you my final thoughts, and I'd like to search the reasons why this game became such popular, why it is such a very interesting design. So let's begin. Here is Sekigahara, the Unification of Japan, prepared to play a new game. Now, firstly, let's take a brief look at all the elements which we will be using. What you're seeing right now is the game prepared from the Tokugawa perspective, because we, as you can see, have the possibility to look at all the black blocks which are placed onto the board. We do not see the nature of the opposing blocks, which is part of all block games in which we have the fog of war mechanic. Thanks to it, we know that the opponent has blocks in a location, we know the exact number of those blocks, but we do not know what is their nature and what is the type of unit that is represented by such a block. Now I said that the game is presented from the Tokugawa perspective right now. Who was Tokugawa? Well, he was one of the two leaders who clashed at Sekigahara. And Tokugawa was the one Tokugawa Ieyasu was the one who emerged victorious from the struggle for supremacy in Japan. And his dynasty, which he started after Sekigahara, lasted for more than 250 years and ruled Japan. So the black blocks will represent the Tokugawa forces. The Tokugawa himself is represented by this block. As you can see, we have several symbols on the map which represent also special daimyo locations. We have 4 big families on both sides, which took sides both of Tokugawa and of its adversary, who was Ishida Mitsunari. Ishida Mitsunari is the gold leader, who also has 4 clans aligned to him, but in contrast to Tokugawa, he doesn't have his own clan, because he was not a daimyo, he was not a nobleman. But he has 4 clans which are aligned to his forces, and each of those clans also have their own location. The board represents the central part of Honshu, the major Japan island. We have Kyoto, the ancient capital of Japan, and Edo, which was Tokugawa's capital. Edo became Tokyo. So this is actually where Tokyo is located right now. This board, as you can see, represents the part of the island where the struggle took place. Sekigahara itself is located right here, so here the climatic struggle took place. We have, I already said, locations which are the capitals of each of the family represented. We have also connections between cities. Now we have 3 types of cities. 2 of them are the capitals, Kyoto and Edo. Then we have resource locations. Those are the red dotted spaces, which are extremely important in terms of acquiring additional blocks, additional reinforcements. The player who controls the most number of resource locations at the end of a turn has the possibility to acquire 1 additional block, which he will be able to master during his next turn. We have also normal cities, which are important in terms of counting movement points, and each time a force will occupy a given city. It cannot end its movement between 2 cities. It will always be located inside a city. Apart from resource locations, normal cities and capitals, we have also castles. We have 7 castles. At the start of the game, 4 of them are black castles and 3 of them are yellow castles. And castles are also very important because the player who controls the most castles at the end of each turn will have the possibility to draw 1 additional card. And cards are extremely important because cards will not only determine initiative, they will not only be used to resolve combat, they will also be used to activate your own units. We have also some additional information on this board. I said that there will be additional units recruited, and each side has their own recruitment box. As you can see, the Tokugawa forces are located at the bottom of the board, whereas the Ishida's reinforcements are at the top of the board. A special box is used for the Mori blocks. We have 5 such blocks which start the game inside a special dedicated box. This is a way to simulate how the Mori clan behaved during the Sekigahara campaign, because the Mori clan sided with Ishida, but they had their own ideas about how to forge war, and they decided to protect the heir of Toyotomi Hideyori, who was located at Osaka. Now, this is a special unit, a special disc representing the small child who was Toyotomi Hideyori. He was the heir of Toyotori the Elder, and when the Sekigahara campaign took place, he was 2 or 3 years old. So Ishida, in fact, was trying to secure the heritage of Toyotomi and to protect his heir. Well, at the end, it's Tokugawa who emerged victorious. Toyotomi survived, but later, when he was 15 years old, he was killed. We have also on the board additional information. We have a turn track which will help us to track time and track the current impulse played, because we will play up to 7 turns, and during each of those turns we will have 2 segments, segment A and B. We have also the impact track, which will be used to track impact points during battles. I will explain how battles work, showing you an example, so I won't be explaining right now how this works. Now, apart from the map, we will be using blocks, and those blocks are of course of 2 colors. We have the black ones and the gold ones. In general, blocks can represent units or they can represent leaders. Leaders have those standards, those noboris, and each such nobori can have 1 or 3 dots. As you can see, Tokugawa himself has 3 dots, which indicates that he has 3 strength points. Over units have a certain number of mon symbols, which indicate what is their strength. In this case, we have 2 symbols, which tells us that this block has 2 strength points in a battle. We have also special units. We have cavalry units and gun units. Those will have only 1 strength point, but if used with a special card, they can receive additional bonuses and can have a much superior power than initially. As you can see, some blocks have also a special symbol at the bottom. This indicates that such a block starts the game on the board and it is part of the initial setup. The initial setup in Sekigahara is done in such a way that we find all the blocks with the starting symbol, we place them in the corresponding spot, and apart from that, we draw a certain number of random blocks from the reserve, from the bag where over blocks are thrown before the game starts, and we add them to the initial forces. Some locations, as you can see, have an information that we have to place a certain number of random blocks, and those blocks, as you can see, do not have this initial setup symbol because they were randomly drawn. This makes the initial setup of Sekigahara always different, not in terms of the number or the place where those blocks are located, but in terms of the types of blocks which are located in different places of the board. When we speak of initial setup, one thing deserves to be mentioned for players or for owners of the first edition of the game. Now, there are some small differences between the initial setup in the first and in the later editions of the game. Those differences concern the Uesugi clan, so the clan aligned with Ishida forces. The Uesugi in the first edition started the game with only 3 blocks with their mon symbols.
so those units, as you can see, but they had overblocks which started the game inside their bag of additional forces. In the changed rules, which were written by Calkins after the first edition, this initial setup was changed and 2 additional blocks were added to the initial forces of the Uesugi clan. This makes this force much stronger than initially, and this also is a certain way a try to simulate how the battle took place, how the campaign took place, because the Uesugi forces were tying down a lot of Tokugawa forces in this sector of the island. In the first edition, the Uesugi forces were quite weak, and Tokugawa could actually completely ignore the presence of those forces in this sector of the island and concentrate solely on the Sekigahara region. Thanks to this change, the Uesugi forces become much stronger than initially, and they can check in some way the Tokugawa forces in the eastern part of the region, of the board. So this is a thing which is something that we should be aware of when playing a first edition copy of the game. I have a first edition copy of the game, and when preparing the game I always have to remember that I have to make this small change. I said that we receive additional blocks because each player receives their own bag inside which he will place the remaining blocks. Those blocks will be drawn during the game and they will be placed onto the reinforcement box, from which they will be placed onto the map. Now, how Sekigahara works. Sekigahara in general is a game which will last up to 7 turns. If the game lasts for 7 turns, at the end we will count the number of victory points, and those are attributed for controlling castles. Castles grant you 2 points at the game's end, and resource locations, which give you 1 point for each location. The player who has the largest number of points at the game's end wins. There are also 2 ways in which a game can end in sudden death. The first way is to kill the opposing army's leader. So if Ishida or Tokugawa are slain, the opponent, we can win the game. The Tokugawa forces have 1 more way to win the game. If they manage to capture, so eliminate the disc representing the small heir Toyotomi Hideyori, they can also win. Now this disc is located in Osaka, it cannot move. But this is not an easy task. Firstly, as you can see, we have a lot of Ishida forces in Osaka at the game start. Secondly, even if those forces move, if Osaka is attacked, all the Mori blocks which start the game in the Mori box will join the battle and defend Toyotomi in Osaka. But it is a possibility, it sometimes happens. The game, as I said, is played in a series of turns, and at the game's start, each player will draw a hand of 5 cards. Sekigahara is a game in which cards are extremely important, and each player has their own distinctive deck. This deck of cards has cards related to your clans, so you have cards with the symbol and with the name of the corresponding clan. Those cards will be used to move units, they will be used to battle, to recruit additional units. Now, as you can see, those cards have 1 mon symbol or sometimes 2 symbols. In general, 1 symbol will enable you to place 1 unit into the battlefield, 2 symbols will enable you to place 2 units. Some symbols have also the samurai sword, which enables you to play those special decks, special blocks, activating the special attack, so enabling you to acquire more impact points during a battle. Each deck has also a certain number of loyalty challenge cards, which will be used during battles in order to make opposing forces switch sides. This is also another way how Calkins tried to simulate how the Sekigahara campaign looked. Those two alliances, which were gathered around Ishida and Tokugawa, were not very stable. So there were cases when some daimyos switched sides. For instance, during the Battle of Sekigahara, one of the major Ishida's daimyos who initially declared support for his cause switched sides and fought alongside Tokugawa forces in the battle. So this is a way to represent this thing. Those cards enable you to try to steal opposing blocks during a battle. I will show you how they work in a few moments. On each card we have also a number which indicates what is the value of such a card if used during the initiative phase. And when talking about initiative, the turn is divided into two segments during which the players will act. But firstly, we have the initiative phase, during which each player will choose one of the cards that they have in their hand. They will show this card to their opponent and we will compare the value. The player who has chosen the card with a bigger value can choose if to go first or if to go second. When this decision is already made, we start the player A segment, which is always comprised of movement and combat. Then we proceed to the segment B, during which it's up to the second player to do the same, to move his units and then to resolve his combats. Now, during the movement phase, a player has the option of discarding from 0 to 2 cards from his hand. If he decides not to discard any card, he has two options. Firstly, he can discard all his hand and draw a new one. This will be used if you have really weak cards and you are unable to do anything interesting with them, or maybe preparing for an important battle. Secondly, if you do not discard any cards, you can make minimal movement, which enables you to choose only one of your stacks on the entire map and move it. A stack are all the units which are inside a location. Normally, a stack can move with up to one location. This can be modified due to some bonuses. Firstly, if you move completely through a highway, so if all your movement is along a highway, this increases your movement by 1. Secondly, due to leadership, which is activated if you start your movement in your capital or if you have a leader in this location, you can also increase your movement factor by 1. Finally, if you decide to discard a card, you can force march and you can increase your movement rate by 1. The movement rate can be decreased by the number of blocks in your stack, because for each block from the 5th onwards, you lose one movement point for each set of 4 blocks. So from 5 to 8 blocks in a stack, your movement factor will be reduced by 1. From 9 to 12, it will be reduced by 2. And for instance, if you have 17 blocks in a stack, you won't be able to move even using all the possible bonuses. Movement is made alongside roads. You cannot pass through enemy locations, but you can end movement in a location where opposing forces are located. This will trigger a battle during the next phase. There are overruns possible if you have a big stack moving through a place occupied by a small enemy stack. We can also hide inside castles, because castles are not only important in terms of cards, they are also extremely important in terms of defense. But I'll show you how siege work in a moment, how sieges work in a moment. In general, in order to move, you have to discard cards because minimal movement, as I said earlier, enables you to move only one stack. If you want to move more, you can discard one card from your hand, which enables you to move up to 3 stacks. And if you discard 2 cards, you can move all your stacks on the board. If you have the possibility to move any units, so if you decided to move any units, you can switch one of those moves. You can exchange one of those moves against a recruitment possibility. Now, recruitment or mastering in this game enables you to put new units onto the board. In order to do so, you take a look at all your units which are located in your recruitment box, and now you have two possibilities. Firstly, you can choose any of those blocks and place it into any recruitment location, which is a location with one of your daimyo symbols. So even if the block comes from another family, you can place it inside such a location. But if you want to recruit more blocks, you can choose blocks coming from the same family. For instance, here we have 2 blocks coming from the same family, and after showing them to your opponent, proving that they all share the same mon symbol, you can place them in the corresponding recruitment location. So adding them in such a way enables you to put more blocks during one recruitment, and you can do only one recruitment per turn. So it's important to use it up to your maximum in order to have more units than your opponent on the board. After moving, after recruiting, it's the combat phase, during which all combats, so all situations where opposing blocks are located at the same location, are resolved. How those combats work, I'll explain it to you right now. For the sake of this example, let's assume that an army led by Tokugawa himself decided to move from Anotsu to Kumano to confront an army of gold blocks led by Ishida himself, but Tokugawa wasn't aware of it. Now, when a battle begins, so when blocks of opposing armies are stuck together in one place, a battle is resolved. Now we have 2 types of battles. We have pitched battles and sieges, which take part when the defenders decide to seek refuge inside a castle. A castle can store up to 2 units. So if an army is bigger than 2 units, it has to defend on the open field. Of course, some of the blocks can also seek refuge inside the castle. Now, when a battle is initiated, it is fought up until both players stopped playing cards, because entering a battle, so having some blocks arrive into a location with opposing units, doesn't mean automatically that all the blocks will be deployed. In order to use those blocks, you have to play your cards in order to bring those blocks to the battlefield. When both players pass, so when both players do not want or cannot play any cards, the battle is over. This means that sometimes one of the players will pass and the second player will still have the opportunity to play 1 or even more cards, because passing is definitive. You cannot replay. So when you pass, you end your activity in such a combat. Now, when a battle begins, it is up to the attacker to initiate combat, because at the end of a battle, we will compare the number of impact points possessed by both armies. In case of a tie, it's the defender who wins. So, because we start the battle with 0 impact points each, It's up to the attacker who has the obligation to play a card, or rather to deploy a block in order to take advantage in the impact race. The first thing that we can do during a combat is to deploy a leader. A leader, if we still haven't played any cards, can be deployed for free without playing a card. So, because we have Tokugawa in this battle, the first move made by the black forces will be to deploy their leader. Such a leader will be deployed without the play of a card, and it grants 3 impact points because we have 3 dots on the nobori. So we will indicate that the Tokugawa player has 3 impact points. Because the Tokugawa player is in front in terms of impact points, it's up to the gold player to place one of his blocks. Now, for the sake of this example, I will show you all the blocks which are part of the Ishida army. Of course, in a real battle, the type of blocks possessed by your opponent will be a thing, will be a mystery, and those blocks will be unveiled one after another. Now, as you can see, we have 2 leaders, two Ishida, 2 gold leaders in this army. The first unit deployed will be, in this example, the Ishida leader. As you can see, Ishida is also, as well as Tokugawa, a leader who has 3 dots on his nobori. So deploying this leader will grant the Ishida player 3 points, which means that, again, because both sides are tied, it's up to the attacker to place some units. The Tokugawa player doesn't have any over leaders, so now he'll have to use his cards. So he'll have to look at the cards that he has in his hand, and he'll have to compare the symbols of the houses presented on the cards to the symbols on the blocks that he brought to this battle. So looking at those blocks, we can, for instance, play a date card, which will allow us to deploy this 3 mon symbols date block to the battle. So let's place it by playing the date card, which brings our impact up to a total of 6, because this block has a strength of 6. Again, it's up to the Ishida player. Now, the Ishida player, in contrast to the Tokugawa player, still has a leader. So, because the Ishida player didn't play any action card for now, he can deploy it for free. As you can see, it is a weaker leader than Ishida. It has only 1 dot on his nobori, so it will grant us 1 point. We still are 2 points apart from the Tokugawa player. So it is still up to the Ishida player to play new cards or to place leaders. Now, we do not have any leaders left, so we will have to deploy a unit. Again, we have to compare the cards that we have to the blocks that we have on the battlefield. Now, looking at those cards, we can see that we have a double Yukita card, which will allow us to deploy 2 Yukita blocks at the same time. So let's play it. We can play the Yukita card, allowing us to deploy 1 block with 3 mons and the second one with 2. But here is the thing. The first block will increase our impact by 3 points. But the second one will also increase our impact by 3 points, because we'll have 2 impact points coming from the symbols themselves and 1 bonus point because we have already deployed a block containing the same symbol during the battle. So this will grant us 1 more impact point, bringing our total to 10. That would be a fantastic move, but the Tokugawa player has an ace. He has a loyalty challenge card, which he decides to play. I said that the loyalty challenge cards are meant to simulate the way how the Sekigahara campaign was full of treachery, of alliance changes, etc. And by playing this card, we force the Ishida player to unveil from his hand another card containing the Yukita symbol. If he can keep the card and the blocks are deployed. Nothing happens. But looking at the cards of the Ishida player, we see that he has not any Yukita card left. So, disaster for Ishida. Both blocks will join the Tokugawa forces, changing sides, which means that it's not our impact which was increased by 6. It's the impact of the opposing forces who was increased by 6, bringing the Tokugawa army force up to 12 impact points. Things are getting very serious for the Ishida player, so we still have to play new cards in order to increase our force. Now, we can increase our force playing, for instance, a Kobayakawa card, because we can bring this 3-mon block to battle, bringing our total to 7 points. It's still a long way to go, but we have another Kobayakawa card, as you can see, with the special samurai sword symbol. So by playing this card, we can deploy the Kobayakawa block with the cavalry symbol, which will give us 4 additional, which will give us, yes, here it should be 8 points, because 3 and 1 for the leader. And this single block will grant us 5 points. 1 from the symbol itself, 2 for the cavalry symbol, because we played a card with the sword. If we deployed this card with a single card without the special attack, that block would be worth only 1 point. But here it's 3 points. And +2 for the 2 other Kobayakawa blocks already deployed. So we take the lead barely by bringing our total to 13 points. The Tokugawa player still has a lot of cards in his hand, so he can comfortably, for instance, play a date card with the special symbol, allowing him to deploy the unit with the shotguns, bringing his total once more to a comfortable lead, because this single block will be worth 1 + 2 = 3 + 1 for a symbol already present on one of the previous blocks, which means that our total will be brought to 16, 4 points, 4 more points. The Ishida player has only 1 block left, 3 cards. We can deploy this block by playing the Mori card, which will bring our total to 16, which means that we are tied. In case of a tie, remember, it's the defender who wins. But the Tokugawa player, seeing that the Ishida player has not any blocks, has no blocks left, can just play his cards comfortably without the fear of losing. Of course, he must still take into consideration that the Ishida player, having 2 cards left, can have also his own loyalty challenge card. So he'll still have to be careful. Seeing the cards that we have, we can play the Tokugawa unit. Unfortunately, as you can see, it's a special unit, but we do not have a Tokugawa special attack card, so we can deploy it without activating the special attack. Still, it's an interesting unit because it gives us 2 points, 1 for itself and 1 for Tokugawa, who shares the common symbol, so it will give us 2 additional points. We have 2 blocks left, and both blocks can also be deployed. We can play the Fukushima card again without activating the special attack, so we'll receive only 1 point for this card, for this block. And finally, we can deploy the strongest unit inside the whole game. Those are the Naomasa Red Devils, a special unit who charged first at the Battle of Sekigahara, the only unit having a strength of 4 in the game. At the same time, a unit that can be deployed using any card. So we can use, for instance, our weak Tokugawa card in order to increase our impact to a final result of 23 points. Now, this is the final result of the battle. 23 points of impact for Tokugawa, 16 for Ishida. How losses are are applied. Firstly, we calculate the number of blocks that each side will lose. Each side will lose a number of blocks equal to a full 7 impact points inflicted. So if the Tokugawa army inflicted 23 impact points to the Ishida army will lose 3 blocks. The Tokugawa army will lose 2 because Ishida managed to score 16 points. So normally it would be 3-2, but the losing side always loses 1 additional block. So the final result would be 4 blocks lost by the Ishida army and 2 blocks lost by the Tokugawa army. The Ishida army will have to destroy firstly the blocks who deflected to the opponent, and then he'll have to choose 2 over blocks from those that he deployed, which will also be eliminated. If during a battle we are unable to deploy a unit, or if we do not want to, we can still destroy it, but first we have to take losses using all the blocks which were deployed. The Tokugawa player can choose from the blocks deployed 2, probably the weakest, which he will also destroy. After the battle, the losing side has to retreat. Both players discard all their cards played, redraw the same number of cards, and then draw 1 card for each pair of blocks lost. After resolving the combat, a new combat is resolved if there is any on the map. Sieges are fought in a pretty similar way, in the way that we count the impact points on the same track, but there are some differences. The first one is that the impact is calculated only for the attacker, so it's only the attacker who plays his cards, and he has to accumulate at least 14 points in order to destroy 2 blocks inside a castle. If there is only 1 block inside the castle, 7 points will be enough. But the problem is that during sieges we cannot use special attacks, so we cannot increase our strength using cavalry or shotguns. Those blocks will be weaker during sieges. Additionally, loyalty challenge cards cannot be played during sieges. The final difference is that after a siege, the losing side will draw a card for each block lost. So not for a pair of blocks, but for each block that was destroyed during a siege. And that's pretty it when it comes to the combat resolution system in Sekigahara. After resolving each combat, if this is the last segment of the turn, we pass to a new turn, during which we start by reinforcements. We discard half our hand, rounding in our favor. We draw 5 cards, 6 if we control more castles. Finally, we add blocks to the recruitment box as listed on the recruitment track, +1 if we control more resource locations. Then we bid for turn order and we play a new turn using the player A, player B system. Now I'd like to share with you my final thoughts about this game. I'd like to tell you why after so many years after acquiring it, I still love it, why I think it's a brilliant design, and why I think it is one of the best war games ever published.
Sekigahara is considered as one of the best war games ever published. This is the reason why this game is currently ranked 5 in the world in the war games category on Board Game Geek. Now, there are several reasons why this game is so popular, but I'd say that this is quite ironic that the game, when first introduced to the P500 list, wasn't popular at all. It took several years from the first information about this game and its release, and even at that moment the game had only somewhere around 700 pre-orders. I'm proud to be one of them, because I instantly backed this game as soon as I have seen it. This was such an intriguing theme, such an intriguing design that I wanted to try it, and believe me, I wasn't disappointed at all. Moreover, when the game got released, it suddenly got a lot of supporters. Many people said this game is excellent, you should try it. And suddenly it became very popular. It climbed, it got released 4 times, I believe, and currently it is ranked 5th in the world. So, wow, what a great story. Now, I said there are several reasons why this game got so popular, and I'd say that one of the pretty obvious reasons, but a thing which sometimes is omitted when judging war games, is the way how this game looks. Because not only Eurogamers like pretty games, wargamers also like pretty games. Wargamers like to put the map in front of them, to put stacks of counters, to clip their counters, and then to admire how all this pretty wargame looks. And Sekigahara is a terrific design. It's so pretty, it's so astonishing, it's so elegant. The choice of the colors, black and gold, the great map, it all fits well. It's just fantastic to look at this game, and it's even better when you try it. So, firstly, the game looks great. That's always a nice thing. That's always something which attracts the attention of additional players. The second thing is, I already used this word. This is one of the most elegant games ever published. This is a game which, in a fantastic way, shows designers, shows players how to combine interesting theme with great mechanics. It was not an easy task to design a game which would simulate how the Sekigahara campaign looked, because there were so many factors, there were so many variables, and so many things specific to this campaign. Many designers would choose a path taken by some designers which includes adding a lot of chrome in the form of additional elements, of additional rules which say that something happens during turn 4, something else happens during turn 5. You cannot do something until you take control of a castle. You can use some units only when battling against some forces, etc. Calkins choose another way, and when playing Sekigahara, you absolutely have no feeling that you have to remember some very specific rules, that you are forbidden of doing something. Sure, there are some limitations. For instance, you can put 2 blocks inside a castle, period. But you do not have the feeling that your liberty of movement, that your decisions are limited by some rules only to make you act in a way that would simulate the way how the Sekigahara campaign evolved. And this is brilliant, because introducing some interesting mechanics in form, for instance, of challenge cards, of loyalty cards, which simulate the way how some daimyos, how some troops behaved during the Sekigahara campaign, how they betrayed their initial allies and sided with their adversaries, is just fantastic. A single card which makes you instantly feel of this betrayal of this interesting mechanic. The 2 discs added to the game, Toyotomi the younger and Sanada, who defends the castle, another great examples of how not to complicate a design and at the same time add interesting chrome. We have tons of such micro rules, such micro touches of Calkins. Those are not micro rules because, as I said earlier, the rules are short, are easy to master, are easy to explain. This is the reason why I played this game recently. After 3 or 4 years of pause, and still I managed to play a competitive game in after 10 or 15 minutes of a quick rules refresh. That would be impossible when trying to tackle some more complicated games. But Sekigahara is quite accessible. It's not a monster game. It's not a hard game to learn. It's an elegant design with some 10 or 12 pages of rules, very well written, with really a little doubt after reading this rulebook. So this is an accessible game. This is also one of the reasons why this game is so popular. Then it deserves to be mentioned that this game is extremely climatic. It represents well the campaign fought and which led to the Sekigahara battle. It at the same time guarantees that during the game you'll get tons of interesting situations. You have really a lot of decisions to make. How many cards to discard, what blocks bring into battle, what resource locations control, how to attack castles or how to defend castles, how to decide what cards to keep when you're forced to discard, where to recruit, etc. You have a lot of things to do, you have a lot of decisions to make. At the same time, you then battle interesting battles without any dice. The combat resolution system in Sekigahara is brilliant. It's so interesting, it's so intense, it's so competitive, and at the same time it is so unexpected because some battles are really epic struggles. You bring 7 or 8 powerful blocks and you have the cards, but now your opponent has even better cards and he has a loyalty card challenge at the end, and a battle won becomes a battle lost. This is excellent, this is epic, and this is one of the reasons why the combat resolution system in Sekigahara is one of the best ever designed. What I really like in this game is the fact that it is a quite short game compared to other war games. It's easily playable in 2.5-3 hours, but if someone makes a mistake or has bad luck committing his leader to a decisive battle earlier, it can easily end in 1.5 hours or even shorter. So this is a game which is very accessible because of a few reasons. Because it is pretty, so it attracts your attention. It is easy to learn, easy to teach. It is then easy to play and at the same time very engaging. So it has absolutely everything that it needs to become a real hit. What I believe are the weaker points of Sekigahara. Are there any? Well, I'd say those are very minor issues. The first one is that sometimes you have the feeling that the board, although very pretty, becomes crowded. You have tons of blocks in one location, then you have doubts if those blocks are effectively occupying this location or are they split between this location and another which is very close to the first one. By putting your blocks, you then do not see if this is a castle, if this is a standard location or a resource location. So sometimes the board becomes crowded and you might have some issues in looking and instantly finding out that the location is what you thought it was. I sometimes played and I discovered a castle where I didn't expect any, because I do not remember where each castle is located after playing this game 3 or 5 years earlier. But this is not an issue. This is only a thing which I am telling you because I had some problems with it, but it's not really a thing that would down my opinion about this game. Secondly, I think that the rules governing leadership, which increase your movement factor, maybe should have got a small tweak, because when using leadership, you sometimes have to unveil your leader. And this tells your opponent that you have a leader here and what type of leader you have. Sometimes I believe it can give too much information to your opponent, and you might be tempted not to use leadership in order to preserve better fog of war. But in my opinion, you can easily house rule and decide that you are showing only the part of the block which clearly depicts that you have a leader, not showing the type of leader, so not telling your opponent what clan this leader, from what clan this leader is from. This again is only my subjective opinion. This is my personal feeling. I don't believe that that's an issue for many fellow gamers. A small issue was concerning the not the replay value, because the replay value in Sekigahara is excellent, but rather the balance between both sides. Because when the game was first published, many players stated that Ishida is much harder to play, it is much more difficult to win with him. And I must say that that feeling was, well, it was based on many plays. And I'd say that Ishida was much more difficult to play, because the approach when playing Tokugawę was pretty straightforward. You accumulate forces in Edo, you march west, and sometimes you try to control the east by submitting the Yosugis. Playing Ishida was not that easy, because you had several Tokugawa forces located to the west, to the north, and you had to decide what to do with them and how to prepare for the decisive battle. So it was a much more difficult approach. I'd say it was still pretty equal, but even so, the designer decided to make a tweak between the first and the second edition. And in from the second edition, the initial setup is a little bit different from the first edition. You add additional blocks, the Uesugi forces located in the eastern part of the playing area. You get 2 additional blocks, making this force much stronger. And this was in its origins a thing which was trying to make Tokugawa concentrate more also on the eastern part of the island, and making this Uesugi force stronger made a real threat to the Tokugawa's rear. So that's an interesting approach. I think that the game is still very competitive, playing with the initial rules, and quite balanced. Playing with the second edition rules, I have seen some complaints that now Ishida is just too strong. But even so, I believe that playing with the first or the second edition initial setup rules, the game is still pretty balanced. And that's also a reason why this game is so interesting, because it is very asymmetrical. Both armies are very different. You have blocks, of course, you have 4 families from which those blocks come, but it's very asymmetrical because both decks of cards are different, both recruitment locations are different, and the starting places, the starting locations of both armies are also very different. So playing both sides will be a different experience. This is one of the reasons why this game has such a big replay value, because I remember that when this game was on the P500 list more than 10 years ago, some people complained that the replay value of this title will be quite low. Yes, you have the same amount of blocks each time. Yes, those blocks start the game in the same locations. But firstly, the playing experience from both perspectives is totally different. Secondly, the initial setup is still different from game to game because you have a certain number of random blocks added to the initial lot. So each time the game will evolve differently, because remember, you will have to make decisions according to what cards you have in your hand. You won't be entering a battle with 5 Mori decks if you have 1 Mori card in your hand. That's just not the thing you should do. So each time the battle will evolve differently. Having said all that, I believe that Sekigahara is really a brilliant design. It is one of the best war games that I have ever played, and I'm not surprised that it is so popular, that it is so highly ranked. It's a very accessible game, a very climatic, a very pretty game with a terrific combat resolution system. If you like block games with interesting mechanics, which are quite easy to learn and very climatic to play, Sekigahara is a must-have, is a must-play. This was the review of Sekigahara, the unification of Japan, published by GMT Games. Thank you a lot for watching this review. I invite you to take a look at our other videos and also at what we publish on Facebook and Instagram. I wish you a terrific day and see you next time.